Hello, everybody. Welcome back to our videos on the digestive system. So I just gave you an overview of the digestive system, the anatomy, some of the basic processes in the digestive system. Now we are ready to go over what happens to food as it moves through the digestive tract, starting with the oral cavity and the esophagus. So the very beginning. Okay, so I actually want to start by saying that even before food enters our mouth, we start our digestive processes. Okay, and we call this the cephalic phase of digestion. So, cephalic means having to do with the brain. And basically, the way it works is if we see or smell food, our brain processes that information and then it activates long reflexes that then activate secretion and motility in the digestive tract. Okay, so even before food enters our mouth, we've got the digestive juices flowing, the digestive juices being the enzymes, and we have some motion happening in our digestive tract. Once food does enter the mouth, we encounter saliva. So I want to spend the next couple slides telling you a little bit about saliva. Okay. Saliva is made by the salivary glands. We have three of them. You can see them here. One, two, three. The salivary glands are exocrine glands. So to remind you what an exocrine gland is, it is made up of these epithelial cells that kind of form this layer, okay? Um, and they make secretions that reach the external environment via a duct, okay? So that's what the salivary glands are. They're this type of gland, okay? What are the contents of saliva? Water, ions, mucus, enzymes, immunoglobulins, antibodies, okay? And in the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about some of the functions that um, those contents carry out. Salivation is under autonomic control. Okay. All right. Okay, so now let's talk about some of the functions of saliva. Okay, so one of the functions is to soften and moisten your food for easier chewing and swallowing. So that's kind of where the water and the mucus come in. Okay. Another function of saliva is starch digestion. So we have this enzyme in our saliva called amylase, which takes starch, breaks it down into its component, um, smaller carbohydrates. Okay. Um, Another function of saliva is taste. So the saliva helps to dissolve our foods so that we can then taste the components of the food in our taste buds. Okay, so that's another function of the water. And then one last function of saliva is defense. So we have, again, enzymes in our saliva and we have antibodies in our saliva that are going to protect against pathogens entering the rest of the digestive tract and potentially entering our bodies from there. Okay, so those are the functions of saliva. That's happening in our mouth. I also want to point out that while the food is in our mouth, encountering the saliva, we are doing some stuff, right? So we're chewing, which mechanically digests our food. It breaks it down physically into smaller pieces. It also mixes it up so that it can more easily encounter the saliva and undergo these processes right here. Okay. All right, so once we have chewed up food and mixed it with saliva, we call that little kind of chunk of chewed up food, we call that a bolus. Okay, so that is what is shown here in this diagram. This is meant to represent a kind of a chunk of chewed up food. Okay. Um, we swallow our food. I'm not going to go over the process of swallowing, but we swallow it, thereby transferring it from our mouth to our esophagus. when the bolus is in our esophagus, it gets propelled down to the stomach via a motility pattern called peristalsis. Okay, so this figure here shows us how peristalsis works. Okay, here's our bolus. And basically, the way peristalsis works is that you have a contraction of the circular muscles that are around the digestive tract. They contract in order to move the bolus forward. Then we have successive parts of the digestive tract contracting behind the bolus in order to move it forward, okay, in order to propel it forward. So that's kind of what's shown down here is we have our first contraction here and then another contraction over here to continue moving our bolus forward. So you can kind of think of this as sort of like taking a tube of toothpaste and pushing it up from the bottom to get the toothpaste towards the top where it comes out, right? So you push from behind to move that toothpaste forward up in that toothpaste tube. Okay, so here's a question for you. Which layer of the GI tract wall is responsible for peristalsis? Remember, we have our 4 layers. Which layer is the one that is going to be doing this action right here? Think about that for a second. Okay, so our layer is going to be the muscularis externa, this muscle layer right here. Okay, so you might not have remembered the name, but hopefully it makes sense to you that it would be the muscle layer that is doing the muscle contractions that are propelling our bolus forward. So that's basically all that happens in the esophagus. It's just kind of a relay between the oral cavity and the stomach. The food, just the bolus, just kind of travels through the esophagus to get to the stomach.